and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs.
Hello everybody and welcome to Irreverent Faith and Current Affairs. This is the Wednesday edition of this show. Now, you might have been listening to this podcast for a long time. Indeed, it's been going for 5 years now, so you might have been listening for 5 years and never heard about this Wednesday edition. Why is there a Wednesday edition? Well, it's a new thing. It's a new initiative that I'm starting, frankly, to try and broaden this podcast's reach, but also just to give an opportunity to do different stuff. So the Wednesday edition, there's going to be interviews. I might do reaction pieces or monologues. I'm thinking about doing a New Year's address as well. And when there's something sort of miscellaneous but still really interesting and broadcast worthy, then I will simply put it on here on the Wednesday edition. I'm going to try and do this every single week. Can you believe that? 2 irreverent podcasts a week. Now, as I say, a big part of this is just because I feel like, you know, it's a new season and it'd be great to try and expand the audience more, try and reach more people as we scatter the seed. So I do want people to support this show. I always say that, you know, we're supported by you, the listener, but I'm not even going to tell you to do that now at the beginning of this episode, which is going to be a great episode, by the way. I've got my friend Sam Norton coming on and tell you about that in a minute. But I am going to give you a call to action, okay? This is going to cost you no money. I'm not asking for money at this point. I don't want you to give me your money at this point in the podcast. All I want you to do is a couple of things, okay? Are you listening? All right, listen up. This is what I want you to do. Sorry about that, listen up. If you don't like that, maybe that's too American for you. I don't know.Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Anyway, this is what I want you to do. Subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on your audio podcatcher thing, just subscribe to it on Rumble, wherever. I'm putting it on Rumble all the time now. On Twitter, follow us on Twitter. Okay, so that's one thing I want you to do. Follow us on Twitter anyway, even if you're not watching on Twitter. So we're x.com/ReverendPod. We're on Twitter. Please follow us. If you're watching this on Twitter or on YouTube or wherever, share it now. On Twitter, it's very, very easy. Just repost it now. Wherever you're watching it, just get it out there. Just send it out there into the ether. Similar thing on Substack. Just do it. Please do share this podcast and tell your friends about this show as well. Tell them about how much you like Irreverent and what we're doing here. You know, we're clerics in the Church of England, but we're telling the truth. I mean, that's the whole USP of the show. So please do that. Second thing, if you're on Telegram, Telegram's great. Join us, t.me/irreverentpod. All these links will be in the show notes. Join us on Telegram. I'm always posting stuff on Telegram. Please do join us there. So that's another thing you do. Another thing you can do is you can email the show. Your emails make the show so much more interesting, and it's great to be able to engage with you. So please do email the show at irreverentpod@gmail.com. Now, if you want to support the show, all the links, financially that is, all the links are in the show notes below. As I say, I'm going to give a proper plug for that at the end, but I want to tell you that now in case you are thinking you want to support us. You get loads of free stuff, but I'm not even going to tell you about that now. We do need the money because we use the money to run the show and I use the money to live, so it's kind of important. But at the moment, all I want you to do is those call to action things. Just support us on social media, tell your friends, email if you like, go on Telegram and do all that kind of great stuff, okay? Now, this Wednesday edition, I haven't done it yet. It's about to happen. I'm going to do it in 14 minutes. I'm interviewing Sam Norton, Rev Sam Norton. Sam is a friend of mine. He was actually the priest at the church where I grew up in Mersey Island, which is in Essex, if you don't know, as many people who are listening to this won't. So Sam was the priest there for many years, about 15 years or so, I think he was there. He was there for a long time. It's a lovely place. I don't blame him for staying there for a long time. I'll let him tell you about what he's doing now when I speak to him. But needless to say, Sam he's a deep thinker. He's an intellectual. He's written books on various different topics. He stood for, I think it was the Brexit Party. He's very pro-Brexit. He's green, but he's a climate change skeptic. We're going to talk about all that. And we're also going to get his thoughts on Christian nationalism and all that stuff, you know, that controversy and everything that's going on at the moment. I don't really even know what his thoughts are about those things. But Sam is always interesting to listen to. I think the other thing about Sam, which I really like, is he's a very gracious man as well. Very gracious, very gentle. And in many ways, he fits that archetypal vicar mold of a gracious, gentle, deep intellectual. But because of the way he is, he kind of stands out because there are not many people like Sam. I was actually on placement just occurs to me to tell you this. Before I was ordained, I did a placement in Mersey Island with Sam. And I remember when I was there, Sam actually announced that he was leaving his post to go do something else. And I was in one of the churches. I remember it was the church in East Mersey when it was announced. It wasn't announced by Sam. Sam wasn't there. One of the church wardens announced it. And I remember there's an intake of breath in the congregation. And I remember a woman in the congregation saying, "We won't get him back." And that was the reaction. They were really sad that Sam was leaving, and "we won't get him back" didn't just mean he won't literally come back. It meant that, as it were, the spirit of him won't come back. We're not going to get another one like Sam. And there really isn't. There really aren't many people around like Sam. So I think this is going to be really super interesting conversation. I'm excited about bringing Sam on the podcast. I'd like to get him involved, more often with certainly with stuff like this and ongoing conversations. So super excited about that. All of those links are in the show notes. If you want to support us, I'll give a proper plug for that at the end, but please do those calls to action, which I just spoke about. And I hope you enjoy this podcast, and thank you as always. So now I'm very pleased to be joined by the Reverend Sam Norton, soon to be the Reverend Dr. Sam Norton, because you're working on a very interesting PhD, aren't you, Sam? So I'm sure that's going to happen. The only reason you don't have a doctorate, I think, is because you've been working so hard as a parish priest, really. So you should have an honorary doctorate by now, in my opinion. But it's great to have you here, Sam. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I was saying in my introduction that we obviously go way back. I mean, way back to in some ways to my childhood, because you were the vicar at Mersey Island Church, the two churches in Mersey Island. I think you were there for 15 years, weren't you? So
I was.
Yeah. When did you go there?
2003 I started on Mersey.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I was 16 at that point. And then you were there for about 15 years. And I was just saying on my intro that you were actually there when I was there on placement when you announced that you were leaving. Yes. So I was there to see all the drama. And I was also saying, Sam, that people were very upset when you left as well. Not upset with you like you'd done something wrong, but they were upset because they were going to miss you.
Well, I miss them. And it was because it was so close to where I grew up. I was born Chelmsford and grew up just outside Malden. So Blackwater Estuary is home for me. And it was a real wrench to leave home and come west. But it was there was a definite sense of calling from God to go west. The passage with Abraham,
yes,
where it says "Go west and found a new nation." For some reason, that just kept on coming to my mind, so I started looking at jobs.
Right, there you go, into the West Country. Yeah, but that was a particularly nice summer. Actually, I was on placement, I think, for a month with you, and it was very hot, and it didn't rain much, but it's beautiful on Mersey when the weather is like that, and especially near West Mersey Island Church is particularly beautifully situated, I think, because it's just round the corner from the beach, and it really is a lovely place.
It's ancient, deeply ancient, founded on the site of the Roman governor's summer house.
Yes,
and all the mosaic beneath the graveyard, and some of the tiles from his roof are in the it's the only Norman tower that predates the Norman invasion.
Oh, is that right?
For West Mersey Church, yeah.
How is that then? Where did the Normans come from?
So it was linked to the Abbey of Rouen in Normandy itself.
Yes.
And it was a satellite from that. So that's why they built the Norman Tower, which of course has a wonderful view over the estuary. But even more than that, do you know about the incense?
No.
So in the Barrow on West Mersey, they found frankincense used in burial. It's the only place in Western Europe.
Really?
So it was clearly, I sometimes tease people. I think that Mersey is actually Avalon, right, and Camelot is Camelodunum, i.e. Colchester.
Ah, really? That's the first time I've ever heard that. That raises it to a new level of significance for sure.
Mersey's a profound place.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's made me feel very nostalgic for my home. I was going to say, I don't know whether we have many listeners on Mersey. I know my mum listens, and she lives on Mersey, so shout out to her. But if there's anyone else...
Hi, Gail.
Yes, hello, Gail. If there's anyone else in Mersey, do give us an email or a message on Twitter, on X. It'll be interesting to know. But what a great place. Sam, let's talk serious stuff, and we've got so much to talk about today. We're just saying we're probably going to have to do this in several episodes, but it's an ongoing conversation as well. But we're going to get to know you a bit here, Sam. So we're going to dig into your past a little bit and hear a little bit about your story. Lots of people will know you from your blogging and your writing,
Yeah.
but some people won't as well. So tell us. So you've not always been a cleric. You started off in the Department of Environment, and
So
yeah, go ahead.
I'll rewind a touch.
Yeah,
I was raised Anglican, then about age 13, 14, became a militant atheist in the Richard Dawkins mould,
nice.
went up to university to get lots of good arguments to bash Christians up with. The arguments went the other way. But then after university, as I was sort of coming into the faith, started work at the Department of Environment. This was in John Major's government a long time ago, because I've always been very, very interested in ecological questions. So I thought that was a good place to go. And I was very, very interested in politics and wanted to have a political career. But then in about 1995, I had a moment of clarity and conversation with God when God made it clear that that was not the path I was supposed to go down, but I was supposed to go into the church. And that was focused on St Matthew's, Westminster, which is a wonderful place, right in the heart of Whitehall. So that is how I then started going into the church, trained at Westcott, and then did my curacy in East London instead.
All right. Okay. So you're at Westcott. So you moved out of the Department of Environment. At this point, you were so tell me what sort of attracted you to that kind of role in the first place, and what were you doing in the Department of Environment?
So I was what they called a fast streamer, which meant you got moved around once a year in order to get a good appraisal of the whole department and the department's work. As I say, I've always been very interested in ecological questions. That was the main interest. So I started on questions of nuclear safety for nuclear power stations, got involved in a public consultation to do with Sellafield, then did what was called a single regeneration budget, so inner city regeneration, dealing with poverty, then went into local government finance and something wonderful called compulsory competitive tendering. In other words, things like putting bin collections out to different competing private companies.
Right.
But then my last job was involved in setting up the Environment Agency, which was in 1996.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
So in the 90s, early 2000s, I would say I was absolutely in the mainstream. I was a Guardian reader. I was pro-EU. I was absolutely in it completely. And in some ways, the interesting thing is the journey out of that, what I now always just call the bubble.
Yeah.
The mainstream consensus, or we'll come on to Brueggemann, I'm sure. The royal consciousness, or the court of Pharaoh.
Yeah, the pharaonic consciousness, I think you call it sometimes. Yeah.
Because I now see it as absolutely captured and secular.
Yeah.
And of course, the more I understand about the faith, and the more joy and freedom I find in the faith, and the intellectual satisfaction, then the more I think, oh, how can they still think that? But of course, that's uncharitable. So I try to resist that.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, tell us then. So you're a Guardian reading environmentalist. You buy into all of the kind of the pharaonic consciousness and so on and so forth. So what happened? I mean, how did it change?
So when I was on Mersey, I started something I called the Learning Church, which were Saturday morning talks on basically. I started it off as a sort of confirmation course, but just for the whole congregation, or who was interested in the congregation, because one of the things I find really important in terms of the Old Testament witness is the exile and what happened in the run up to the exile and the impact of the exile and so forth. And of course, I mentioned this very early on, and no one had a clue what I was talking about. So I thought, right, we really need to do some foundational work here to teach people about the exile and what it meant, and therefore the whole Old Testament story and narrative. So I was doing Learning Church sequences, and I started doing one on how to understand the ecological crisis more broadly. So I do think that the Limits to Growth Club of Rome analysis has a lot of merit to it, and is being, and over the last 30 years that I've been following it, it has been following the analysis set out from the early 70s, which is quite remarkable. So
do you want to just tell people, Sam, like who don't know what that is?
Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
So in the early 70s, as the, if what's now called the Green Movement, but the ecology movement started to get going, people started to realize that you cannot sustain indefinite or infinite growth on a finite planet on the basis of finite resources.
Mm-hmm.
And it applied to in all sorts of different directions. So in terms of overpopulation or over pollution or the rundown of resources that are needed, the projection was that sometime in the 2020s, 2030s, that industrial civilization is going to hit fairly significant limits that are going to lead to a degree of population collapse and retreat from much of the industrialization. And I still think that's true. And so I started to do a sequence of talks talking about the ecological crisis, but understanding it from a Christian point of view, which ended up in my, I put it into a little book.
Yeah, very good book.
Which I
I've read it
a long time ago.
So Sam, just to say the name for it, so it's called Let Us Be Human, just for people who are not watching. It's called Let Us Be Human. I'll put the links to all of Sam's stuff on the show notes. So sorry, Sam, carry on.
That's fine. No, it's it needs a bit of an overhaul, and I'm planning to do a second edition sometime next year when I have a moment. But
very good.
If you go to my Substack, which is called Elizabethanian, it's actually the text is all on there in a sequence. So you don't have to buy it, but obviously if you wanted to buy it, it's available on Amazon. And I get like £1 if you buy it.
Right.
Which would be lovely. Anyhow, so I was doing this sequence of talks about how to understand the ecological crisis from a Christian point of view, and to talk about how it's at root it's a form of idolatry, and therefore because it's at root a spiritual problem, the solution to the ecological crisis must be spiritual. And I advocate for the Eucharist as not just something which forms the church, but that it takes on the function of the temple in terms of healing the world. So the Eucharist doesn't just form the church, the Eucharist heals the world. In other words, it teaches us how to see the world rightly. And because we then learn to see the world correctly, we act in the world correctly, and therefore we don't cause chaos and rape nature and so on. So that's that's the background, big picture.
Yeah.
But I was going to do it starting with global warming, because that has been for a long time the main buzz, and I've always been interested in it, and I accepted the mainstream consensus view of it. But one of the other things I was interested in was resource limits, in particular to do with energy, because, as I say, my first job was looking at nuclear power. And I've always been very interested in questions of, if you like, the fuel supply for industrial civilization. So I got interested in something called peak oil, which is the idea that the flow of oil from any particular well goes on a roughly bell-shaped curve. So it starts ramping up very, very quickly, but it comes to a point when you cannot increase the flow anymore, and the flow of oil from that well inevitably declines. And that's something which applies not just to any particular individual well, but any area of wells. So the North Sea peaked, I think, back in 1999, but Cantarell in Mexico has peaked. You know, there are lots of large areas. The continental United States peaked back in, I think, 1970. There are lots of areas of oil supply which have gone through this process. So it's a very robust concept, and it was simply extending that not just from one area, one particular well or group of wells, but to the world. And the idea is that the amount of oil you can get will go through this peaking process and then decline. Now, I came across some research by American, I think he's in California, I've forgotten his name now, but I could look that up, that was basically looking at the IPCC analyses for global warming and how much carbon was going to be pumped out. And he was pointing out this analysis on the part of the IPCC doesn't take into account the peaking of fuel supplies. And that, put simply, there isn't enough carbon to justify the fears about global warming. I thought, now that's interesting. So I started digging into it, and to cut a long story short, went through. This was the time when have you come across Andrew Montford's work, The Hockey Stick Illusion?
Yes, I think I've come
all the
across
stuff
it.
about ClimateGate and the University of East Anglia. Michael Mann, who was a slightly dodgy professor over in America.
Not the
this was all
film director.
in the news at the same time. And so I started rooting around and doing research into it and realized that actually what was called the science behind global warming, I call it CAGW, which is catastrophic anthropogenic global warming. And we might come back to that in a second. Just the science is just not good enough. And I mean that it's not good enough on two levels. One is simply as a matter of scientific fact that the conjectures derived from what's known are too much. And actually, there's an American academic called Judith Curry, who's superb.
Yeah.
And I recommend her book on climate uncertainty. I mean, she's just great. And the wonderful thing about her is her scientific credentials are impeccable.
Yeah.
And she, like me, I think, went on a bit of a journey from being accepting of the consensus to just thinking, hang on, this doesn't add up. But I think the science isn't good enough for a second reason, because what's happened with the global warming hysteria, and I would call it that, is that it's advocating all sorts of policies which harm people, like net zero in Britain. And these are not good. There are lots and lots of not good consequences. And the science not just isn't good scientifically, but it's not good enough morally. It doesn't justify the immoral consequences that are being done. It's a delusion. Great delusion.
Can I ask you, Sam? I mean, I'm fascinated to hear you carry on with your story, but I just want to ask you at this point a question that occurs to me. Now, it sounds like from your story, in a fairly straightforward way, had a view, you read some stuff and found out more and changed your view, which sounds like the way that human beings should operate. But with something like global warming, and I would say with many other things in the pharaonic consciousness, particularly around science, lots and lots of people just seem incapable or unwilling to engage with just straightforward questions of fact. And you would also, I think, also in terms of what you just said, reason as well, just reasonable conversations about, given what we know, given what the evidence is, what's reasonable to do. You could say all sorts of things about that, around political policy, like, for example, just to bring it, to something relevant, the kinds of policies that the Church of England have about replacing our boilers in our churches, for example. That's not going to make any good difference to anything. So it literally won't change anything, except for it's going to destroy these churches, because people won't come if the churches are cold, and the buildings will probably dilapidate, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't seem like we're even able to have conversations like that. So what I'm saying is, it's not only that just science isn't operating in the way that you would like it to, but it's also that reason doesn't come into it. So it's an ideological thing. It's almost like a kind of religious thing in that sense.
Left-Hemisphere Capture.
Right. Okay. So tell us about
that. Just before I do, one of the things I'm actually most quietly pleased about is that in my previous parish, the central authorities were saying you've got to get rid of your oil-fired boiler and do ground source heat pumps. And it was a very poor parish, and this was just going to cause all sorts of problems. But I managed to get the deadline for the changes deferred by at least 5 years. And I'm pretty confident that within 5 years, net zero will have gone, because although there will be oil peaking, the chances of being able to heat that building by an oil-fired diesel heater are quite positive. Whereas going down the whole electrical heat source, ground source heat pumps and stuff, was just going to be so complicated and wouldn't necessarily answer the problems. So, Left-Hemisphere Capture. So this is using Ian McGilchrist's language. And his Master and Emissary is the first one, and then The Matter with... Have you read The Matter with Things?
I've not read The Matter with Things, I'll be honest. I've read The Master and Emissary, but to me it's I just don't know, it's such a commitment. It's such a big book.
It is, but it's wonderful.
Right.
It is truly wonderful. In some ways, the key original ideas are in Master and Emissary. So this is the idea that the different parts of the brain, I think you touched on this with your chat with Alex Schuler, the two parts of the brain pay attention to the world in different ways. And the left hemisphere is to do with exercising control over the outer world, whereas the right hemisphere is broader less narrowly focused. And actually, the right hemisphere is the master, to use his language, and it's the bit that engages with music and poetry and meaning and religion and all the good things about being human. So he actually uses a phrase once, I think, in Matter with Things, to talk about left hemisphere capture is when a person's understanding and therefore paying attention and interaction with the world is closed off from wider issues. And this is also an ego thing, because ego is left hemisphere. As is anger. Anger is the only emotion in the left hemisphere. So left hemisphere capture is when, and actually we would call this idolatry. Left hemisphere capture is when someone is so locked in to a particular understanding of the world, and they are so invested in it being true, that they literally cannot hear, they literally cannot pay attention to the, if you like, counterfactuals. They haven't got the imagination, because they are so trained and conditioned to look at the world in a certain way, that anything which is foreign to that way of seeing things is fended off. And of course, over time, what happens is that people who are caught up in left hemisphere capture get more and more detached from reality. And hence you get, we're coming right back to exile. Because this is what happened with the Israelites. They felt that they had the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem, all was well with the world, because God had defended themselves from before, and miraculously so. And they couldn't understand that actually, because they'd fallen away from the path of the living God, things were about to happen to them. And I think we are in the same situation, as you've written about. Western culture, Western society has become so locked into this sterile, modernist, rationalist, materialist way of understanding the world. And the people who are in this secular point of view are in this, what I call left hemisphere capture. They simply cannot see, they cannot pay attention to what is outside.
And
catastrophe follows.
It's a great summary. And I think that's one of the insights I really took from that book, The Master and His Emissary. It was the thing about attention. The way that our attention really creates our reality. And so, but it does create a problem, doesn't it? Because if people can't pay attention to something because they haven't been paying attention to it for such a long time, it raises the question of how you can break into that cycle, doesn't it? So you obviously weren't experiencing left hemisphere capture because you actually read something and it changed your mind. So, do you have any thoughts about that?
In terms of how to break people out of it?
Yeah.
I thought what you were talking about with your chap, is it Alex Schuler?
Yeah, Alexander Schuler, yeah.
Alexander Schuler. He was very interesting, because the whole situation, if you go out of the West, the modern West, and you're in pretty much any other human civilization in the world, then your assumptions will get challenged, and there'll be a challenged, if you like, throughout the day.
Yes.
So you can't escape the challenging of it. Whereas because we are taught in our society not to see,
yes,
if at any point something comes along and to use the expression, slaps you around the face with a wet fish, you're going to deny it.
Yeah,
because it doesn't fit with your worldview. And I think, sadly, we're in the midst of watching many things break down, and I think God is going to have to really be upfront and brutal with us before we wake up. I think we're entering into catastrophe. I think what I call Starmageddon for the United Kingdom, because that bubble, that left hemisphere capture, is not just about ecological questions in both directions. I think they're terrified about the wrong things. And they're not paying any attention to the resource constraints, which are massively impacting stuff, especially like the Ukraine war. I think it's in there as well. We won't go too much into that. But
another podcast.
We're opposite positions on that one.
Oh, I don't know. I'm open-minded. I'm open-minded about Sam. Karen.
It's a total mess. But I think because we are so trapped as a culture, society, as a leadership. If you look at our leaders, well, I'm sure we'll come on to church leadership in a second. They are completely constrained and formed by this deficient worldview. They act according to the deficient worldview, and it's going to take many disasters before they wake up and think we may need to change what we do.
Yeah, so it might be
quite pessimistic.
Yeah, it might be the pain of disaster that brings them around to thinking differently, as it is in life in general. Sometimes, many times, it takes a disaster to wake people up, doesn't it? And it's interesting also what you say about going to other cultures or viewing things from other points of view, sometimes you can only do that if you literally go somewhere else and immerse yourself in a different way of thinking, I suppose.
Yeah.
Get
Yeah.
yourself out of the echo chamber. I mean, but it's also true of other, I mean, partly when you talk about this, I don't want to sort of insulate myself and think, well, because I'm not sort of part of that sort of leftist progressive bubble, that I'm therefore immune from left hemisphere capture. So I think we have to be we have to continually be self-aware about these things and apply them to ourselves, don't we?
But this is where I would argue the whole heart of Christian discipleship rests,
Mm,
because it is the perennial human tendency to fall into sin, to fall into idolatry. And we have to therefore continually be reminded and brought back to a grounding, a spiritual grounding. And obviously, because we're Christians, we'd say, Jesus is the light of the world, and we
mm,
pay attention to Jesus. And insofar as we do so, then we see the world correctly. Blessed
mm,
are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
mm,
So we have to do this purifying of the heart, purifying of our emotions and responses, which of course is what the early church thought of as struggling against the demons, in order to then see the world correctly and act rightly.
mm. Is there?
Has to be mystically rooted, if you like.
Yes. Is there a danger then, do you think? And I do want to go back to CAGW in a minute, but is there a danger that we tend to see politics as a secular thing and we don't apply the spiritual life to it in the way that we should?
Have you come across Nicholas Lash's book, The Beginning and End of Religion?
No, I don't. I know Nicholas Lash, but not that book.
Really, really good book.
Mm,
And to brutally summarize his, and he's a wonderful writer. Love
mm,
him.
mm.
He's gone to glory now, hasn't he? I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Anyway, in this book, he points out that the modern use of the word religion is very much detached from its ancient and medieval use.
Mm,
And we in our society, and this is an aspect of our blindness, we think of religion as a particular category of behavior. Some people do football, some people do religion.
mm,
Whereas classically, to be religious or to do something religiously is to do it. It's like a virtue.
mhm, mhm,
So you are doing something in the light of God.
mm,
Whereas if you bracket off religion as this thing, this particular sphere of activity, then you're actually in practice bracketing off God
mm,
from all the other realms of life.
mm,
And this is one way of understanding the distortion which our society has gone through, that we've, and our church leadership, I think, accepts this, that it's accepted this role for religion as separate from the rest of life.
mm,
And therefore, when you are faced with these crises that require a theologically engaged input, which
mm,
the church is there to provide, because they've bought into this idea that religion is this separate realm where people do it if they like, that sort of thing,
mm.
we're impotent.
Yeah.
So,
And is
and he makes the argument. Sorry to just
yeah,
briefly.
go on.
He makes the argument that this is very much bound up with modernism and is on the way out.
It's on the way
Because
out.
it's on the way out.
Right.
Postmodernism has ushered it out.
Okay. Okay.
That's the argument of his book.
Okay. That's interesting. What's the name of the book, did you say?
The Beginning and End of Religion, and religion is in scare quotes.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that's good. I'll have to read that. But let me ask you this, though. Well, let me say this, because one of the things that it seems to me about this, this sort of capture, this sort of progressive ideological capture of, say, the Church of England or any kind of Christian institution, is it seems to sort of turns Christianity into a kind of a subservient force to the progressive agenda. So
Yes.
so everything serves the progressive agenda. And the thing I always find this quite telling when I mean, we do it on the podcast all the time. It's almost a bit repetitive now. When we do a comment on one of the archbishop's, seasonal greetings to another religion, they always say the same thing. They say, "Greetings to our Sikh friends or our Muslim friends or our Hindu friends. Thank you for everything you do in the community. We're all working together to make things better." And I always think, well, it's not really what Christianity is, but I'm pretty sure it's probably not what any of these other religions are either. It's turning them into the kind of handmaiden of, progressive secularism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Completely agree with that.
Yeah.
I think sometimes, if I might be so bold, you're slightly uncharitable towards them on a personal level.
Well,
The bishops that I've known, and I think in particular, one or two of them have been really quite um, wonderful Christian witnesses, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But my issue, and it drives me around the bend, is that when they come together as a group, they're captured by the ethos of the institution. I would use principalities and powers language, and they lose their capacity to witness effectively as Christians, and they become part of the Borg.
Right.
You know, they just get subsumed into this sort of very I would want to use the language principalities and powers, demonically captured entity.
Yeah. Why does that happen? If they're say godly people and knowledgeable people, why does it happen?
Well, this is a long story. My thumbnail sketch would run along the lines of we can go back to the Middle Ages if you like, but let's not go all the way back to there. Let's not go through all the whole Darwin stuff. Let's start say with the 60s and John Robinson and so on. And that, quick confession, it was John Robinson's book Honest to God that helped me move from atheism to faith.
Right. Okay.
Which is because I realized I didn't have to leave my brain at the door if I wanted to be a Christian. So even though, if you like, his substantial theological position is way too liberal for me, but he did a service for me personally. And in the 60s, his book Honest to God was set up by an article in the Observer which had the headline "Our image of God must go." And I think from the 60s onwards, the Church of England in particular was given a reputation of being non-believing, that bishops didn't believe that sort of thing. Now, I think that's a bit unfair, but it came to a bit of a height with, say, David Jenkins. And he was massively misquoted.
He's the Bishop of Durham.
David Jenkins, Bishop of Durham in the 80s. Who taught my tutor at Oxford. So in some ways, I claim my intellectual descent from him. Again, I'm not a liberal by any stretch of the imagination. So I think there was a trajectory whereby the church lost intellectual confidence, stopped asserting the deep supernatural reality of the faith and all that meant, and instead has become subsumed into what I call the idolatry of the second commandment, all lots of worthy social causes, because that gave them a certain level of acceptability in the world. It's like, well, we can't actually defend our belief in God anymore, but hey, we do all the food banks. Now, doing the food banks is absolutely wonderful and a Christian duty. Do not misunderstand it. But if we are not rooted in the faith, if we're not rooted in proclaiming the gospel, then let's pack our bags and join Oxfam.
Yeah, of course. Why the second commandment?
Idolatry of the second commandment.
Why that? Why are you
saying? So Jesus' summary of the law and the prophets. The first commandment is love God with all your strength, and the second is love your neighbor.
I was thinking the 10 Commandments. So
sorry, I should have made that clear.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I think that's my sort of shorthand summary of what's gone wrong in the Church of England. We have an idolatry of the second commandment.
Yes. Oh yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Okay, well, let's go back to CAGW, shall we? Because we didn't quite get to that. So we got to you being skeptical about the hockey stick graph and so on and so forth. So do you want to talk to CAGW a bit?
So there are so many things wrong with what you might think of as the IPCC consensus. And so
I don't think we've actually defined the IPCC for people who don't know what it is. So could you say something about that?
Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Yes.
And I think we're now in like the 8th or 9th iteration of this. So when you see all the government officials and leaders going off somewhere exotic in their jets, like Rio, and they get together and say it's bad to fly to places. And it's normally because they want to get together and proclaim various things. Now, I would make a distinction between the scientific reports that are covered, which are often of extremely high scientific quality, and what's called the political summary, and which is then, if you like, what is written by the politicians, not the scientists, to describe what's gone into the report. And one of the most important things to realise is that the IPCC was set up only to look at human impact on climate change.
Right.
So if, for example, there's a Danish researcher called Svensmark who's been looking at the impact of sunspot cycles on the climate of the Earth, that is not allowed within the IPCC system because it's not looking at the human contribution.
Right.
So all the stuff which says, well, what about natural variability, or what about the impact of volcanoes and so forth, can't be considered by the IPCC because it's not a human contribution, and therefore it falls outside the remit that it was set up with.
Yeah.
So if you want to say, well, yes, I don't doubt at all that the Earth is getting warmer. That's why English sparkling wine is the best in the world, because southern England's climate is now what northern France was 30, 40 years ago. So don't have any dispute that the climate is warming. But then again, it's been so very, very cold. And if you actually look at the data, it's very, very healthy for the climate to be getting warmer, and it helps human life to flourish. It helps agriculture to flourish. This is on the whole a good thing. The thing that I get most wound up about is the catastrophe bit, because it's effectively a secular religion. Because people have this idea of a wrathful God, and they think that if they appease the wrathful God, the apocalypse can be held off. And if you haven't got Christianity to sort of put that into a coherent shape, you're going to end up, oh dear, I've got to chastise myself by not using carbon in order to fend off the apocalypse of this excess carbon monster.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I think that is true. I think it's true, but I find it hard to get in the mindset, so occasionally I come across people, just, average people out there in the street. And that is very much the way they talk. It's like they need a moral component to their life, secular people. It's like they need a moral component to their life. And that's it. It's like, well, I'm going to, I'm doing my bit for the environment. And that's my sort of morality.
And this is why woke has become so deep rooted, because it's a way of trying to channel people's inherent desire to be ethical. We human beings are instinctively cooperative for the most part. I mean, ignore the psychopaths and sociopaths, but for the most part, most human beings are positively intentioned and want to look after the people they know, their neighbours. And if to emphasize that is to work with the grain of human nature. Most people want to be good, want to be kind, and actually want to be left alone to earn a living and put a roof over their children's heads. And if they can do that, then they're pretty happy.
Yes. Yeah, it's very interesting. I didn't know that thing about the IPCC, not like ruling, like as a sort of principle, like an a priori principle, ruling out
The fix was in from the start.
Yeah, it's just amazing, isn't it? It goes back to that what we were talking about earlier, the blindness of it, because that's one of the things I find so shocking about these things. It's just the intellectual blindness. I'm not a scientist, right? I'm not trained in science, but I can see that.
Trained in philosophy, though.
Well, that's true.
And all science is a subset of philosophy.
Okay, that's interesting. Well,
it used to be called natural philosophy.
Yes, I suppose. Yeah. But it just seems like just a matter of intellectual honesty, doesn't it? To say, well, if you're going to investigate the reason for the world warming up, then you need to be open-minded about what it could be. You
consider all the factors, all the possibilities.
You can't just say, well, it must be human beings, so let's find out how and what they're doing. You've got to look at other things as well. So just from an a priori perspective, it's not intellectually credible, or at least it can't make the case starting from those premises. So that in itself, in my opinion, should be a reason for skepticism. I don't think you even really even need to know anything else apart from a fact like that. Obviously, it's good to know things, but that in itself is just an amazing thing, isn't it? It's an amazing fact about this whole thing, that the scientific research just rules out a priori non-anthropogenic factors.
It's not so much the science, because the scientists are still doing this work.
Yeah,
and they're finding out all sorts of fascinating things about the long cycles, and especially some of the paleoclimatology, the good stuff, not the Michael Mann stuff. It is fascinating, but in terms of what enables life to flourish on this planet, CO2 is not a problem.
right.
It just isn't.
It's not a problem at all. Well, even if you had, so even if you increased it significantly, it wouldn't be a problem.
So there are two reasons why it's not a problem. One is if you just look at the historical record, life flourished most when it was in the high thousands,
Okay. That's
parts per
interesting.
million, and
'Cause
people. Yeah.
Sorry, you carry on, you carry on, you give your answer.
But the second is, and you'd need a mathematician to fully explain this, but the impact of CO2 in the atmosphere logarithmically declines. I think that's the expression. In other words, each additional unit of CO2 has less of an impact.
Yes.
And there comes a point when extra CO2 has no further impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it doesn't actually matter.
That's interesting because I remember reading. Have you read Steve Koonan's book Unsettled with a question mark?
No.
Yeah,
No.
so he was some kind of advisor, scientific advisor to Obama or something. I mean, he's a senior scientist in the American establishment, but he's somewhat of a heretic because his book is very much a skeptical take, but a sort of not particularly extreme one. And I'm sure he says in that book that he does actually think that the increase in carbon dioxide is a problem, and it will cause it would be harder for people to breathe and stuff like that. But
That's nonsense.
yeah, okay.
Sorry, that's just straightforwardly
Well,
nonsense.
yeah. Well, fair enough. Well, that's good news if it's true. Why? So, but you say the world is warming up. So there's evidence that the world is warming up for sure, as far as you're concerned.
Yes.
But that's not a problem.
No, more people die from cold than heat.
Right, okay. What about all the so-called catastrophic weather events and things like that?
There is no link.
Okay,
There is no evidence. The only thing that there's a link to is slightly higher precipitation. And that's actually what the IPCC itself says.
really?
There is no clear link. There's certainly things like hurricanes in the Atlantic. There is no link between CO2 and the prevalence of hurricanes. And that's that the IPCC itself says that.
Right, okay. Which again, I know I'm sort of laboring the point here, but it does seem kind of shocking, doesn't it, when you consider the amount of, well, the sort of, I don't even know how to say it in a way which isn't sort of pejorative, but we are basically told that this is a sort of moral catastrophe, that all of these things are happening to poor people because of us, because of the CO2 we're pumping into the atmosphere. And yet there's no scientific evidence that any of it is true.
What we have to reckon with, and again, we're back to principalities and powers language, is that there is now a very large cottage industry, billions and billions of pounds worth, invested in sustaining this narrative. Because if this narrative stops, then the money supply stops. And wasn't it Mark Twain who said it's very difficult to persuade someone if their salary depends on them not accepting it?
Right. Okay. Yeah. I thought you were going to say that thing about what's the one about it's not what people know that
Yes,
people
it's
think
not what
they know,
people
or
know
something.
that does them wrong. It's what they know for sure. It just ain't so.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. I thought you were going to say that. Oh, he's got a lot of good lines. Yeah, it's tricky though, isn't it? How do you engage? I mean, we've talked about this bit. We'll probably talk about it more, but how do you engage with the church then on this? It's such a difficult issue. It's one of those issues where, and I think you can apply it to other areas as well. But it's one of those issues where you feel like there's a sort of trap because you either go along with it and you become, you are a compassionate person who cares about, the poor and all this kind of stuff, and you're also willing to sacrifice your own decadent Western lifestyle, etc., 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 or you do something more like what you're doing and you're skeptical about it, obviously within a sort of reasonable framework, but still you're skeptical about it, and you're apt to be called a pariah, a science denier. You know exactly the kind of people listening to this will know this as well. So what do you do?
We just have to become comfortable being on the outside.
Right.
It's colder on the outside, but you can move freely.
Right. Okay.
I think that more broadly, I think we have to prepare ourselves to catch the people when the bubble bursts.
Right.
So it's about prepare. And the thing is, people can persist in an illusion for a very long period of time. You might say, for example, that the stock market is absurdly overvalued and sell, but the stock market might then keep on inflating for another 5 years. And there is no end to the amount of nonsense that human beings can be led to believe.
How do you, how or should you come out as a cleric who has these views?
I try to avoid using the word should.
Okay, yeah. I did know that about you. But
You've heard me say that before.
yeah, I have heard you say that before.
I think is of the enemy. Um, I think there is something about A, the necessity of witnessing to truth, but B, also it's about kairos, not chronos. In other words, there's a right time to be the witness, and there's a time for just shutting up and keeping your head down. And we'll come back to that theme because it reflects on some of the other things we're going to talk about. But I think the argument has actually been won now by the skeptics. The energy behind the whole global warming alarmism, or climate change alarmism, that's how they rephrased it. The impetus has gone from it. I think the election of Trump in the United States, he's very robustly against it. And actually, I think what we're going to be seeing over the next few years is the energy behind alarm about climate change is dissipating. And I think people are going to start realizing, oh, hang on, our energy resource questions are much, much more important. And peak oil. Peak oil has happened. It's been disguised in various ways, mainly through fracking in North America, which has been essentially financially engineered. But that has disguised the reality. And if anyone of your listeners wants to get scared, research something, the Olduvai Gorge hypothesis, or the Seneca Cliff. So the decline will accelerate. And I think what's going to happen, I mean, China is ahead of the curve on this, as on so many other things. It's investing in as much energy capacity as possible across the whole spectrum. So all with electric vehicles, renewables, but massively investing in coal, which makes what we do in this country, neither here nor there. And because we have been not paying attention in the right way, we are in a really difficult patch. And we need seriously to invest in nuclear power if we want to keep the grid.
So this because oil is going to run out, basically. Well, not run out, but the peak oil problem.
The flow is already being constrained. And as a result of that, things become, roughly speaking, the market for oil hovers between being so low that the price of oil is so low that the producers can't then actually make money producing it, or too high and it chokes off the demand. So there's this like sort of sweet spot, but that sweet spot is slowly getting higher and higher, and therefore more and more of the economy starts to get withdrawn from the use of fossil fuels. Now there are ways in which you can adjust to that, but things like diesel, pretty much all of our industry depends on diesel worldwide. And there aren't many substitutes. So electric vehicles just aren't going to do it. I think we need to invest much more in things like bicycles.
Yeah, well, it's good for your health, I suppose. Let me just ask you this one more thing on climate change. I don't know whether you've come across, I've tried to engage with John Milbank a little bit on Twitter over climate change. And it seems to me like he always says two things. The first thing he says is just, I think, just straightforward pharaonic consciousness. All the academics say the same thing. All the scientists say the same thing. It's all real. You have to believe it. But then also he has the political, well, the sort of theo-political critique, which is, we're decadent in the West, we overindulge, we don't care, we're idolatrous, blah, blah, blah. And in some ways, you can understand from a kind of, from his sort of perspective, that sort of, post-liberal radical orthodoxy perspective, you can kind of see how it's there's a sort of theological consistency in what he's saying, I suppose. He's using it as part of his critique of liberalism and capitalism. So there's something quite sort of almost intellectually attractive in it from that perspective. I just wonder if you've got any thoughts about that.
So let me preface this with a little anecdote, because my principal academic interest has always been Wittgenstein.
Right.
And he was mentored by Bertrand Russell when he was first up at Cambridge. And later on in life, he said of all of Bertrand Russell's writings, all the stuff to do with logic and mathematics should be bound in blue, and everyone interested in those subjects must read them. And all his writings about other subjects, like religion, should be bound in red, and no one should ever read them. And I really like John Milbank. I find him deeply, deeply interesting.
Me too.
And I was in Cambridge when radical orthodoxy was born, and we were all abuzz with it. and I have much sympathy with it. But I feel, and the same applies to Rowan, and Rowan theologically is just wonderful. But I feel that with them, they have their theological writings, theological and philosophical writings, should be bound in blue, and all theologians and priests need to be aware of them and study them. And all the political stuff needs to be bound in red, because it's all just Guardian bubble stuff. And just, well, yeah, okay, well, that's their view.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, they're. I mean, we'll come on, I trust, to talking about the way in which our secular elite sees the world. And so many of our institutional leaders in the church are part of that secular elite. And they say what is treated as completely normal and unobjectionable and, indubitable within that secular elite. And they can't fathom that there are people who, on sincere Christian grounds, disagree with them profoundly.
Yeah. I mean, that is sort of my, in some ways, kind of my sort of simple explanation for some of this stuff when I think about it. I just think to myself when I read somebody like Milbank saying things like this, I just think you must just not know anyone who knows any different or who thinks any different. So it's not they're stupid. It's just that they all think the same thing. Yeah, of course they're not stupid, but they just all think the same thing.
Yeah.
So they just reinforce each other. Yeah, it's a bubble. Yeah, exactly right.
Academia really is a bubble.
Yeah.
It's much narrower than the broader institutional stuff. It's like the bubble of bubbles.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but then
balls.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then what they say is, well, we've got peer review, and you think, well, who's doing the peer reviews?
My mate down the road.
Yeah, exactly. You're all like it's like your colleague who you eat lunch with in the canteen. You're just all the same.
And the peer review says this paper is excellent, but misses a reference to my work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course. So it's not people. There's this sort of idea around peer review. There's some kind of in my view, it's kind of it doesn't do. I'd stop short of saying it does the opposite of what it says it does, but it's not far off. It's just reinforcing the status quo intellectually.
This is where Judith Curry is quite interesting, and she's savage about Michael Mann. So Michael Mann's work is all peer reviewed by the same little circle of researchers who are caught up with things. Whereas Judith Curry has pretty much shifted outside of the academy, and her blog, which is called Climate, etc. If anyone's interested in proper, scientifically rigorous understanding of climate that doesn't buy into the global warming panic and consensus, go to Judith Curry, and she actually publishes stuff on there instead of doing it through peer review, because actually blogging is a much more effective medium because you get the feedback directly. And if you look at some of the comments, it's like, well, hang on, you haven't taken this paper into account, you haven't taken these data into account. And peer review, I think, is an obsolete form of academic consensus generation.
Yeah.
So I recommend Judith Curry.
Yeah. I've written that down. Climate, etc. Good name for a book. Let's talk in the last bit of time we have. Let's talk about this wider distancing from the mainstream consensus. We can talk about that as a principle, if you like. I mean, you can induct us into that as a principle, but there's various things here. There's Brexit. There's Christian nationalism. You've made an intriguing comment in the email you sent me about Ian Wright, Rishi Sunak, and the rape gangs. So where do you want to go with that?
Well, let me do a little bit of biography because. Although I was outside the consensus on an intellectual level for a long time, I can pass for someone within the consensus because this is the culture in which I grew up. I know the norms and so forth. But when Brexit happened, but most especially in 2019, when the Remainer forces were looked to be squashing it through their various legal processes and so forth, there was a moment when a group of bishops wrote in favour of cancelling Brexit, to summarise it. And I felt a very strong sense that actually, I don't think God's on their side. I felt that was an example of pharaonic consciousness. They were part of the secular elite, and that there needed to be a witness of some sort against it. So I was actually in Rome on a deliverance training course, and I was walking around the city and just thinking, because when I was in the civil service, I wanted to go into politics, and God then made it very, very clear I wasn't supposed to go into politics. This was a sort of deeply personally challenging process for me to go through. In the end, I felt, no, he's actually saying do this. Oh, I don't want to do this. But anyway, so I ended up getting involved in the Brexit Party to the extent of being what they called a prospective parliamentary candidate for where I was living. And it was really quite something to stick my head up above the parapet and then for the bubble to repudiate me. So I had a diocesan job, and the person I shared the office with said she would refuse to come in and be in the same office as me.
Gosh.
And there was a staff meeting of all the group one morning, and another colleague stood up and denounced me. And, you know, a 5-minute tirade, and then walked out. And I lost a lot of friends. And yeah, there were other things going on. It was quite. This is what I was saying about sometimes it's good to stick your head above the parapet. Sometimes it's good just to keep quiet. It was an immensely painful, costly time, but I think of it now as going back to Brueggemann. It was a small but personally healing moment of prophetic drama. So prophetic drama is when a prophet, say Jeremiah or Amos, whatever, they act something out which teaches something about God in a way that people can then see if they're attuned to God's will, they can see what's going on. So the best example is actually Jesus turning over the tables in the temple. So that wasn't him trying to stop the traders. You know, half hour after he left, the traders would have got back and going. It was more to demonstrate that God didn't approve of it. And I think of it as simply, you know, the majority of the country and the significant majority of the Church of England didn't agree with what the bishops were doing. And I just thought, someone has to say, look, that doesn't represent the whole of Christianity. Christianity's got room for people who are pro-Brexit as well as those who are against Brexit. But yeah, it had all sorts of ripple effects. The thing that struck me actually about the Brexit Party and now the Reform Party is how many Christians there are. I was surrounded by them, and there were actually other clergy, including one other clergyman in the Church of England who was going to be a candidate, but he got squashed by his bishop, and I won't say names. But you know, bless my bishop, who I think she, as I say, she's an exemplary Christian. That's Bishop Rachel. She didn't agree, but she was a decent human being. Yeah, as I say, an exemplary Christian on this, and you know, I haven't got a word to say against her. I think she's a really good bishop. Yeah. Even though, as I say, disagree politically.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, disagree about that. So, what was it about? I mean, I know, but well, I think I know anyway. But what was it about the content of what the bishops were saying, apart from the fact that, I mean, you said like in a sense that, you know, this big sort of swathe of the Church of England and also the population need to be represented to the bishops. But what were they actually saying that you disagreed with?
Let me condense a little bit here, because I think what's going on at the moment, and yesterday, as we just touched on before we began, the Church of England came out with yet more stuff about, oh dear, the far right and co-opting Christian symbols and the rest of it. If only the Church of England could love the people of England. Wouldn't that be a good thing?
That would.
That might lead to a little bit of perhaps revival of life in the Church of England, which is in many ways moribund at the moment. I am frustrated that the overall leadership of the Church of England is so secular, and it therefore doesn't understand what it means to have, if you like, patriotism. And I wrote an article in a book about how patriotism and theology need to come together again. That I see the path to peace in our nation goes through the territory that Tommy Robinson occupies.
Interesting.
I will unpack that in a moment. But the institution of the Church of England sees Tommy Robinson as this far-right demon figure, because they are conditioned by, and you've touched on the Urim Hazani stuff,
Mm.
They're conditioned to see any expression of nationalism as inherently Nazi,
Yeah.
and it will lead to Hitler, blah, 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 blah. And therefore, going back to left-hemisphere capture, they can't understand what's actually going on, and they continue to make the situation worse. And I see the hundreds of thousands of people who turned out for the Unite the Kingdom march in September as sheep without a shepherd.
Mm.
And dear God, don't we need, and ideally an archbishop, but at least one bishop who's prepared to love them.
Mm.
This is what this is my real beef with the House of Bishops. None of them seem to love the people who are calling out for them, who are saying, hang on, we have this inchoate sense of Christian identity, feed us. And they're like children asking for bread who are given stones. The House of Bishops, the Church of England, is throwing stones at them, saying, you're wicked people. And they're asking for bread, they're asking for leadership. And it makes me cross.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, that seems reasonable to me. But so when you say they could love them, what would it look like? How would it be different?
I think let me I'll come at this from the other end.
Yeah, sure.
It will end up answering your question. What I think the secular elite do not see, and this is what I see as tremendously dangerous, is that they put together someone like Tommy Robinson, who, for all his faults, I wouldn't wish to deny he has faults, but he has immense courage, and he's not racist.
Yep.
And because the secular elite, including the bishops, have this worldview which simply says anything which is outside of the worldview, i.e. nationalism, must therefore be Nazism, must therefore be racist. They cannot see the difference between Tommy Robinson and someone like Steve Laws of the Homeland Party. And do you know anything about
I don't actually know who Steve Laws is.
Don't worry. But I follow him on Twitter just to keep an eye. And I think he is absolutely for ethnic purity, ethnic replacement. The other day he was reacting to Piers Morgan had been interviewed and was saying, well, I want immigration because I like a good curry. And he was responding to that and saying, look, his tweet was literally said, I've made it exact, but this was the gist of it. I would happily eat beans on toast every day for the rest of my life if it meant I didn't have to look at another brown person.
Right. Okay.
I thought, that's racist and wicked and the path to madness and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. And
Tommy Robinson really isn't that sort. And Tommy Robinson has concerns about Islam, and we might touch on Islam, but he's not someone who is wanting to advocate for ethnic purity. He's got, the fact that he had a black gospel group singing Amazing Grace at that Unite the Kingdom rally. I mean, there's something genuine there which is seeking expression. And I do think that place, and we can call it civic nationalist as opposed to ethnic nationalist. The civic nationalism is the only peaceful future available to us. Because the secular elite position is dying under its own contradictions. It won't last. And you've got on the other side, either you're going to go down the ethnic purity route, or you're going to go down the Islam route, or you're just going to have Lebanonization, enclaves, and so forth. For me, I think the most important question is, how can we articulate a robust, grounded, healthy form of civic nationalism, which is inclusive, which doesn't collude with excessive immigration and the elimination of the ethnic majority on this island, but is also not racist, which has this sense of grace about it. And it seems to me that there's a good Christian case that can be made for that. And if only, dear God, our bishops would start making it, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Because they're left hemisphere captured, because they're trapped in their bubble, they cannot see what they need to do.
Yes, but that's partly because they are of the other ideology that you mentioned, aren't they? They are of the persuasion that the progressive liberal thing is going to win out in the end, and that this is an aberration.
Yeah, whereas it's progressive liberalism that's the aberration and won't last.
Yeah,
I think I'll be surprised if it still has institutional effect in 20, 30 years' time.
That's interesting. So let me just dig into this a bit then, because I think it's really important. Civic nationalism. So you said that it's inclusive, but it's not pro-mass immigration. What role does Christianity play?
Well, let me I'll come back to my little. Do you remember when there was a fuss on Twitter for a while about is Rishi Sunak English?
Yes.
And I was reflecting on that because I quite like, on a personal level, I quite like him.
Hmm.
But I was thinking, I hesitate about that, and so I was pondering which direction, if like how to understand it. And then I remembered, do you remember when Ian Wright, there was a TV program and he was reintroduced to his teacher who he
Yes.
thought had died?
Yes, I did. I did see that. Yeah.
Which I thought was lovely.
Yeah.
And you and I are both football nuts.
Yeah. For sure.
So that's part of it. I remember Ian Wright, he's just got such a wonderful personality, and the big grin when he scores his goals, and then on Match of the Day he jumps up and down when England win.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I see Ian Wright as part of what Roger Scruton calls the we,
in
a way that I didn't see Rishi Sunak as part of the we.
Mm.
So I was trying to, what is it about this? And I think more broadly, and Ian Wright for me is a sort of representative example. What we had, at least up until Blair came in, was a reasonably successful, racially integrated society. In other words, the Windrush generation, there had been problems when they came in, different truck the system, all the rest of it. But by and large, we'd got to a place of modus vivendi, a healthy balance.
Mm.
And I think there were grounds for that. And I think there are 5 grounds. One is they're mainly Christian.
Mm.
And perhaps on another occasion we'll go into detail. But I think you can't have a society, not even an ethnic identity, without there being the religious dimension. Bijan Omrani's book.
Mm.
So number one is that they're Christian. They spoke English. They were loyal to the king. They had the inheritance of common law. And in many ways, this is the kicker, they didn't want to stay separate.
Mm.
They were happy to integrate. So I think you had 5 grounds, which the Windrush generation, and also maybe some East Africans and so on, but think of it as the Windrush generation.
Mm.
Ian Wright as the exemplar. They met those 5 criteria, which meant that they could be absorbed into the society, because the numbers weren't so large it overwhelmed locations and so forth. And we were doing well. We were doing well. And the difference, I think, with Rishi Sunak is that ultimately, I think it's because he's not Christian.
Interesting.
And therefore, he can't join the tribe, but he can be an honoured guest. So, for example, I don't have any problem with him being prime minister. The same way I wouldn't have had any problem with, say, Disraeli being prime minister, even though he was Jewish. So you've got a community of people who are of a different ethnicity and religion, but who are completely cooperative and supportive and fit comfortably within the society of which they are a part, and they can play a full part. So you've got the Ian Wrights of this world who, if you like, can be absorbed into a sense of the nation. Call it civic nationalism rather than ethnic nationalism, to make that clear. And then you've got people who can be honoured guests, who, if you like, don't come into your home and throw the sofa over and do other unmentionable things. And take Rishi Sunak as emblematic of that. But the trouble is, if you do have boundaries, if you've got people who are in the country who not just reject all 5 of those grounds, who, different religion, different language, reject the common law tradition, and so on, and then do heinous, evil things, and you know what I'm talking about. Well, let's look at Leviticus 18 and 19, which is all about show hospitality to the stranger and enable the outsider to participate in your community. If you've got those who are refusing it or who are committing mortal sins, then the Old Testament gives a fairly clear indication of what to do. You punish the people for the sin, and it's exile or death.
Yeah.
So for me, the civic nationalism, there has to be a boundary. There has to be a sense of, what it is you're trying to defend, and it's rooted in the land, and it's, the ethnic part of it is an ingredient. But I think you can have a fully Christian understanding of civic nationalism, which isn't racist, and which enables the tribe to be expanded. I mean, who was the king in Omrani's first or second chapter, he talks about the king who united the different tribes as the foundation of England.
Probably Athelstan, I would have thought.
Athelstan.
Yeah.
And I think we would need to articulate some way in which the Windrush generation, as I say, take that as a property, but the Windrush generation are joining the tribe.
Mm.
And over time, the tribe continues, and it's just got this new admixture to it, fine. And then you've got a place for honoured guests, and honoured guests respect the host.
Mm.
But then I think we've got all sorts of problems, which are just getting worse and worse and worse. And they're getting worse because the secular elite refuse to allow the conversation.
Mm.
And they suppress the conversation, and they put you into prison for hate speech, and they destroy your career for saying the wrong things, and all this sort of stuff.
And hence why... I was going to say, hence why the rape gang thing was something which was covered up and was unmentionable for such a long period of time.
Unmentionable.
Yeah. It was almost like they were trying to make you feel like you were the one who was morally reprehensible for bringing it up somehow. I don't even know how, but that was the feeling, wasn't it?
Noticing. We're not allowed to notice.
Yeah. The fact that young girls are being kidnapped and raped and tortured and all
awful things.
But that's interesting to me. So one of the questions that occurs to me to ask is, in your view, then, does it mean that outside of a Christian framework, say hypothetically, we're not going to get Christianity back in the country in any serious way, does it degenerate inevitably then into ethnic nationalism because there's no other framework around which to unite? And when I say it, I mean, the unite the kingdom stuff. Is it would it degenerate in is it going to degenerate into ethnic nationalism without Christianity?
I think it will depend upon where the pain bites first. Are you familiar with David Betts's work?
Yes, he's the Civil War guy, isn't he?
Yeah. So I am persuaded, and my thinking was going along those lines anyway, and then I discovered his stuff via the Louise Perry podcast. And I've been reading up on his articles and things, and he is deeply, deeply pessimistic. And I think he's right to be pessimistic. And there certainly are elements in the body politic of England which are actively imagining a violent future.
Right.
The intellectual groundwork is being laid. And this is why I say where the space that Tommy Robinson occupies is the only space that I think will enable a peaceful resolution of our present difficulties. If that gets squashed, and the state, they've been trying to squash him for a long time, but any occupant of that space is squashed. If that civic nationalist future is prevented from happening, then I think we are facing some very, very violent conflict. And either you're going to get ethnic nationalism as a way of restoring order, which is going to be the far right bogeyman, or we're going to get Lebanonization, by which I mean Britain will be split into different ethnic enclaves.
Yeah, it was so interesting. Did you hear Pope Leo using, I think he used Lebanon as a kind of paradigmatic example of Islamic Christian harmony in his comments. Yeah, I may be misremembering. I have to double check it because I'm about to talk about it with Tom on the Friday edition of the podcast. But he gave an answer on his jet, the Pope jet, whatever it's called. And I'm fairly sure it was Lebanon he was using as an example, a paradigmatic example. I think he'd just been there. But he was asked a question about, it was actually specifically about Islam. It was, lots of Christians are worried about Islam, and he basically said, "Oh, they're just." I mean, obviously, he said it in a slightly more long-winded and diplomatic way, but essentially, what he said was, people who say these things about Islam, they're just like anti-immigration. And I've just been in a place where people, Christians and Muslims live together in harmony, and I'm almost certain it was Lebanon. I really apologize if I've got it wrong, but I think I'm right.
I think they lived in harmony up until about the 1960s, before Hezbollah really got going.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've read Welbeck's Submission.
Yeah, many. More than once. I was going to say many times. I think I've read it twice, but it's a great. I'm a massive fan of Welbeck.
It's a good dramatic portrayal, I think, of the issues. And the thing about the secular elite is they are blind to the nature of all religions, not just to Christianity. And Christianity attracts their particular ire because that's the daddy figure they're trying to get away from. But they don't understand what it means to be religiously committed, and therefore they don't take Islam seriously. The thing
Yes.
about, if we are faithful people, we understand the nature of what it is to have faith. We take Islam seriously, and
Yeah.
Islam has many, many good things about it.
Mm.
And I think part of our trouble in this country is that because we are so spiritually impoverished, that Islam seems so attractive.
Yes,
And
indeed.
obviously, it is. Muhammad's a false prophet, and there are many other issues with it.
Mm.
But because our society thinks religion's just a hobby, it doesn't really matter what you do because they're all the same in the end, aren't they?
Mm.
They're completely blind to how Islam is developing and growing in the society. And in the end, I worry about how compatible Islam is with being English
That's
in a way
interesting.
that I don't with other religions.
Yeah.
Now, that isn't to say that individual Muslims can't be compatible with living in this country, because I think they can. But is that because they simply put their faith on the back burner? If you get into the weeds of what Islamic theology teaches, and you had a really interesting guy a couple of months ago, talking about Islam,
Who was that? I'm trying to remember.
a special guest who's written about it. I've started following him on Twitter now. He has been working as an evangelist in Muslim
Oh
countries.
yeah. Dwayne, what's his name?
That was a really
Yeah.
interesting conversation, and I'd have loved to pursue him a bit more on particular questions.
Yeah, we should get him back on. Yeah.
Islam, in the end, is profoundly different to Christianity,
Mm.
and I don't think we could maintain our English traditions if we became majority Islamic.
Mm. Yeah, well,
Free
common
speech
law.
and
Yeah.
so on.
Yeah. It wouldn't. It would. Yeah, you're right about that. I'm fairly sure. Yeah, Dwayne. I think his last name's Edwards. Sorry, I've not properly memorized his second name, but he wrote a book called Two Stories of Everything, which is a comparison of Christianity, the meta narratives of Christianity and Islam, which I need to finish off. But it's a really interesting book. Let me just. I mean, we should do another thing on Islam at some point, but let me just come back to this just to press this a little bit. So it seems to me that one of the implications of what you're saying is that Christianity is needed to prevent some kind of ethnic nationalism or really civil war.
Yes.
In order to because it would be a component of civic nationalism, right? So there's an irony here that I can see because recently in the press, the scare phrase has just come out all of a sudden. Christian nationalism. It's a bit like the word. It's a bit like the sort of a phrase like conspiracy theorist or vaccine skeptic or something like that. It's been brought out as a kind of scare word to other people who might have some sympathy. This is my view anyway, to some people who might have some sympathy with e.g. Tommy Robinson or the people in that march. But it seems to me that the irony, if I could just try and bring this round, I think the irony is that Christianity needs to be invoked on some level, some significant level, if we are going to avoid precisely the thing that they are saying that Christian nationalists represent, e.g., racism, civil unrest, division, etc., etc. So there's quite an irony there, as far as I can see.
Yes, and the hazard is that we as Christians cannot equate any secular rule with the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's often used as a stick to beat up Christian nationalists from within the church. They say, "Oh, how can you say that this particular form is of God?" Well, just because it's not the kingdom of God doesn't mean we can't just say that this one's better than that one.
Yeah.
We still have, if you like, the relative merits. And just simply as a matter of historical and constitutional fact, England is, and always has been, a Christian nation. And although we've had a couple of 100 years of trying to dismantle that framework, it is still there. King Charles is still head of the church. And if we are to have an England which is generous and inclusive, you can't get to that by dismantling 1,000 years of history, because that then becomes left hemisphere, totally it's like the French Revolution. We're going to remake everything. There has to be something which respects the place and the history and the context of where we have come from, how we have come to be in this place. Roger Scruton again.
So when they say the phrase Christian nationalism, when bishops say it or when it's said on the BBC, I'm not even sure what they mean. I'm not even sure what it could mean, apart from evil Tommy Robinson. There doesn't seem to be any sort of content to it.
I think we need to understand these things spiritually.
Right.
And you've, what's the name? Laura, who did the fear thing for
Oh
COVID.
yeah, Laura Dosworth. Yeah.
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 And I think her stuff impacts on this.
Yeah.
So we need to understand the regime, the Pharaoh regime, as a spiritual entity, as a living thing. And when it reacts in this way to Christian nationalism or conspiracy theory or vaccine denier, we need to see those as simply the antibodies of the system trying to reject an infection.
Interesting.
The truth speakers are outside the system, and the system wants to protect itself. And so the system has detected a threat and sends out the antibodies to try and eliminate the threat.
Yeah, that is very interesting. That's definitely what's happened. It's just strange to me how it just all of a sudden, because that phrase Christian nationalism has, been around for ages in, the sort of popular consciousness. But then just suddenly it's absolutely everywhere. My friend Richard actually sent me a really interesting podcast. I don't know, have you heard of this? She's a Baptist theologian called Reverend Dr. Helen Painter. She was recently on the Nomad podcast, which is not a podcast I listen to very often. Well, actually, I never listen to it, but it's a kind of like post-evangelical kind of, I would say like progressive podcast. But I listen to quite a lot of it. But she's a kind of academic who writes about this stuff. I'm just using that as a kind of example of how this sort of has just all of a sudden become very, very prominent. And yeah, I think you're exactly right in what you say. I think that's what it is. It's
Peter Thiel.
Peter Thiel, yeah.
He's part of this conversation, Vance and so on, and the Girardian take, which is influenceable. This is all part of that conversation. Do you read Richard Beck?
No, I don't think so. Who is he? Tell me who he is.
He's now mostly a theologian. He's actually, I think, a professor of psychiatry originally in a university in Texas. And he's one of my biggest influences in many ways.
Right.
I think he's wonderful. But he's been writing recently about the catacomb.
Yeah. So that's Peter Thiel writes about that as well.
Yeah, and he's taking Peter Thiel to task on it.
Okay.
In various interesting ways.
Yeah.
But yeah. I think this is absolutely part of the conversation. It's fascinating to watch, like the new strategy that Trump's administration just pushed out, the critique of Europe from the administration, that it is going away from European values, and that American government is now explicitly going to be supporting those elements within European politics which are resistant to, if like the EU and all that the EU meant and the woke agenda and so forth. I mean, they are clearly setting themselves up to intervene actively. And in many ways, they're natural allies for all the things we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's interesting. So
I find fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I did want to ask you, actually, this is something I do want to just ask before we run out of time, but the immigration thing, you were saying earlier that the Windrush generation, that worked, largely speaking, because there were mostly Christians who came over, or sort of Christian adjacent or whatever. But we've gone so far down the other road now, haven't we? How can you apply such an observation to the situation now vis-a-vis immigration?
I think it was Stalin who said quantity has a quality all of its own.
Right.
And there's a simple question of numbers.
Right.
And I think there does have to be, sadly, but as a result of very, very poor leadership from the two great traitors of Blair and Johnson, there's going to have to be some remigration.
Right. Okay. So deportation.
Yeah, and certainly all the illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
But I think we need to. I think I'm Rupert Lowe. Was I calling Richard Lowe? Rupert Lowe.
Rupert Lowe. Yeah.
The agenda, the Overton window is shifting so quickly, and his what they called. He's got a little think tank.
Yeah. I can't remember.
It's put out this thing about remigration and so forth. I think something on those lines is just going to have to happen. If there's going to be a peaceful resolution, something like that will have to happen.
It doesn't seem
people just don't have the patience anymore.
Yeah,
the anger out there is so extensive.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say I don't think it seems feasible. I mean, to me it seems reasonable what you're saying, but it doesn't seem feasible. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about, in terms of an immigration policy going forward, how could you? I mean, could you have an immigration policy where people had to be Christian to come to the country, or how would that work? Or what do you think about that?
Well, you do something like a point system, and if
Right,
they're Christian, it gives them an extra 10 points.
right, okay, okay,
Because if they are, then they are at a more fundamental level compatible with the inheritance we've got that we're trying to protect.
okay.
That doesn't mean you exclude all the others,
Mm,
but yeah. And you might also want to prioritize from English-speaking countries.
interesting. Yeah.
That it becomes very straightforward. For example, I quite like the idea of CANZUK. Come across this? Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK.
Yes, I have come across
So
that.
the dominions that that there's free movement of people between those four countries,
Mm.
which on the
Yeah,
whole seems reasonable.
yeah. It's so ideologically, it's so controversial, isn't it? Because we're so used to the idea of free movement. I mean, obviously something promoted by the EU and other sort of globalist bodies, organizations, and so on. So it seems extremely controversial to say that people should be disadvantaged for being, for being non-English speaking, or for not being Christian, or for not being Islamic, and
But
so on. Or
as
being
you're
Islamic, sorry.
deeply familiar with, that is an entirely secular perspective.
Mm,
It's one that I would call anti-incarnational.
right.
Whole scandal of particularity that Jesus wasn't this person who just came down like a Superman figure and wandered around doing miracles and the rest of it. That he lived at a particular time in a particular place in a particular culture means that particular times and places and cultures can bear the holy, and
Mm,
therefore there's nothing inherently unholy about seeking to protect the
mm,
particular place and culture within which we are incarnated.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Bizarre. Church of England has often had seen as having an incarnational emphasis, i.e., the parish system, and yet the Church of England leadership has abandoned it.
mm, yeah,
Crazy.
yeah, yeah.
She'll try not to rant too much.
No. It's fine. It's fine as far as I'm concerned. Christian nationalism, though, is interesting. Is when we go back to that phrase, and bearing in mind what you've just said, because to me that would be an example of Christian nationalism. Because to my mind, if Christian nationalism means anything, it means that Christianity has a privileged place, or a sort of, I don't really know what the right word to be. Privileged nowadays has a kind of pejorative connotations, but like a privileged place within the legal system, culturally speaking. The religion is
Formally,
given.
it does in England.
Yeah, yeah,
All
yeah.
I'm saying is, we don't have to change the laws for this. We just have to implement them.
Yes, yeah. That's the thing, isn't it? That's so sort of strange about this whole situation is we already have. I've said this to various people recently, but we already have bishops in the House of Lords, as you say, like the King's the head of the Church of England. There are
Although
various other things.
the best theologian in the House of Lords isn't a bishop.
Who's that?
Nigel Bigger.
Oh, Nigel Bigger, of course. Yes. Yeah. Friend of this podcast. Been on this podcast. Yeah, that's true. Sam, we're going to run out of time
Yes.
in a few minutes, but just, is there anything else you want to get in before or do you want to point people anywhere in particular?
There was something just then I was going to say, but it's gone. We'll have to do this again sometime.
For sure, definitely, definitely. Well, I've really enjoyed speaking to you, Sam. Always
Pleasure.
fascinating. And yeah, the address of your Substack, is it just elizabethanian.com?
It's Sam Charles Norton, I think. Hang on, I'll tell you.
Okay, I'm gonna make a note of this.
Because that's my sort of official thing.
That's your name.
Yeah, so it's samcharlesnorton.substack.com.
Okay.
So everyone calls me Sam, but if I'm in writing, because there are lots and lots of Sam Nortons out there, including one who's a professor at King's College London who works on the medical side of psychiatry, which is where I'm doing research. So I have to be distinct from him.
Yeah. We didn't even get to talk about that stuff. That would be really interesting to dig into it sometimes. And your blog is actually called Elizabethanian, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the title.
And I still not really sure what that means.
So back when I was at Westcott and emails started becoming a thing, I tried to get an email on Hotmail, which was the first one, and all the obvious Sam Norton ones were taken. I thought, oh, hang on, I can just pick a name from the Bible. So I opened up the Bible and stuck a finger in, I think firstly it was in one of Paul's letters. I thought, oh gosh, this is all theological. Hang on, good names, Old Testament. So I opened up the Old Testament, and Elizaphan was one of the Kohath tribes, one of the Levites, who had care and custody of the vessels used on the altar. Bingo! That's the sort of thing I'm into. That's what I'm like. So instead of being Elizabethan, I'm Elizabethanian.
Great, Elizabethanian. I
Simple as
should
that.
start saying the Elizabethanian. I'll start saying it properly. Dan, thank you so much for
Pleasure.
being on the podcast. A real pleasure. I hope we see you again soon.
I'll be listening.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed that. Now, I have to say that I don't think you're going to get a conversation like that, certainly between two clerics in the Church of England, anywhere else. So I hope you value that conversation. I hope that's been really helpful to you. Actually, it's been really helpful to me just thinking through some of the stuff around Christian nationalism and civic nationalism and all those kind of things that immigration, all those things that Sam was talking about. Really fascinating stuff. I think Sam is somebody well worth listening to. Listen, if you enjoyed that, please do what I said at the beginning of the podcast, which is like this podcast, subscribe to this podcast, and share this podcast on Twitter or Substack or wherever it is. Follow us on Twitter at @IrreverentPod. Join us over on Telegram. I love Telegram, particularly fond of Telegram. t.me/irreverentpod. And since you're still listening, please can I ask you to consider supporting the podcast, not just to support me and to support the running of this podcast, but because we actually give you extra stuff as well. The podcasts come out early when you support us. I give you my 2-hour plus monthly conversations with Nick Dixon, which are always fun and interesting. You get the uncollared bonus podcast, which is me and Tom and Daniel, different combinations, talking about all sorts of different stuff, questions you ask, stuff that's going on, for us personally or in ministry and things like that. So you get all of this extra stuff, and you also get to support us. And as I said at the beginning, we really do need your support because it costs money to run a podcast, and I live off the money I make podcasting and writing. And it really does make a critical difference to me and my family. And it helps me to carry on doing what I'm doing if you support. So please, if you don't support the podcast already and you like the podcast, you've listened to it to this extent, to the end of the podcast now, please support us. Go to patreon.com/irreverent, patreon.com/irreverent, and you can become a supporter and get all of that stuff. There's no discrimination between tiers. In terms of that stuff, you can get all of that stuff there, patreon.com/Reverend, for only £2.50 plus VAT in the UK a month, which is about the cost of a coffee in a reasonably priced coffee shop in Winchester or London or wherever you get your coffee from. Patreon.com/Reverend. Become a Patreon today. Give more if you can. There are various tiers where you can give more. That's one thing you can do. You can also do exactly the same thing on Substack, irreverentpod.substack.com. You can go there as well, just if you prefer to be on Substack rather than Patreon. That's another option for you. You can buy us a coffee, buymeacoffee.com/Reverend. That's a fine way of doing it. However, Buy Me a Coffee takes a cut if you do that. So if you do want to make a direct donation and you don't mind, then send me an email at reverendpod@gmail.com and I can tell you how to do that. But to be honest, I love it when people subscribe because it gives us a regular income, which is so helpful. Just a couple of other things. You can buy my book, The Great Return, Why Only Return to Restoration of Christianity Can Save Western Civilization. That's available on Amazon, and all the links to that and everything else are in the show notes. Finally, you can also find my blog, Good Things, which is it's basically a personal Substack where I write about theology, interesting books, my own ministry and life, prayer and things of that sort. That's at jamiefranklin.substack.com. All of those links are in the show notes below. But once again, if you like this show, if you value what we're doing, please do consider supporting us if you don't already. We obviously give you all of this stuff for free, and it's a pleasure to do so. It's part of my mission, I believe, as a priest and as a Christian, as somebody who's hopefully reasonably thoughtful, to try and get this stuff out there to you and your friends and family, into the world. And if you support, you make it possible, basically. You enable us to do it. So the main thing I'd like you to do is go to Patreon and to do that. Once again, that's patreon.com/irreverent, patreon.com/irreverent. Hope you enjoyed this Wednesday edition. Let me know what you think. Send me an email, irreverentpod@gmail.com. Leave comments on Telegram or Twitter or YouTube, wherever you get this, and look forward to being with you again soon. Bye for now.